Hey everybody, David from Flash by VCycleNet here. And what you're looking at is I got two sets of TST velocity stacks, one set of the stock stacks, and the airbox for my GSX8. And so first, talk about why did I order two sets? So I was concerned that because they were different sizes, that they would require individual fueling for the cylinders. And if we look, the stock ones are different sizes. If you also notice the length of the longer one from TST, it's a little shorter than the stock one, but not much. So since I have these here, I'm going to do a couple tests with these. The first one is I'm going to try running both of the shorter ones and see what that does to the power curve. And then I'll also know how much fueling changes I need to make for the short stacks versus the long stack so that I can individually tune each cylinder if it's needed. So then that way I have the best fueling possible and I can know the offset between the cylinders. Then, of course, I will test it with how they come and I will decide which one I like better. So I get the question a lot with different things, is it worth it? And one of the reasons that I put so many different dyno charts on and I do it from step to step when I do these modifications is so you can decide what's the difference, right? It's really cool when we look at where it was stock versus what it does when it's tuned with the airbox mod and all that stuff. But that's like 4 steps, right? So I show you each step as I go so that you can make that choice. Is it worth it for you? If I just got this exhaust without his flash, what are the gains? Okay, and then here's the gains extra that you get with the flash. Helps you make an informed decision. And a lot of times with those, it's pretty easy because you just get this increased area under the curve from start to finish. You have no places that it's below the stock curve. So it becomes a pretty easy to evaluate. With the velocity stacks, it's going to be a bit different, and let's explain why. So if we take a look inside the air box, you can see where that end openings is where the velocity stacks go through. And what happens, and I'm not an intake engineer, and I don't exactly understand what exactly is going on, but I know what happens. And what happens is believe it or not, as the intake charge is coming into the motor and the intake valve slams shut, the air is moving so fast that it actually builds up pressure behind it. And that pressure actually comes all the way out and creates a pressure wave coming out of the velocity stack that comes in through the air box and bounces around the air box. When we change the height or the length of the velocity stack, what we're doing is changing the RPM that pressure wave actually helps the intake charge go into the motor. So when the factory is setting up velocity stacks, it's always a compromise, basically, is whenever you're choosing a velocity stack length, it's a compromise of where do you want the power. Shorter stacks make more power higher in the RPMs. Longer stacks make more power lower in the RPMs. And a lot of times you'll see these staggered or dual stage so that you can spread that out a little bit more. It's working better in this RPM range on these cylinders, or in this case, this cylinder, and then this RPM range in this, and it kind of broadens that out a little bit. So when we're looking at these really short stacks, what that's going to do is move the where it makes the best power higher in the RPMs. So how did we decide if it's worth it? So we're going to look at the area of where we ride the most. So for a street bike that we're riding around between probably 4 and 7 or 4 and 8 grand most of the time, shorter velocity stacks are probably not going to be something we want to do. If we're constantly revving the bike up to red line and shifting the gears close to red line, well, then these velocity stacks are something that are more likely we want to change to. So what I did is I looked on my dyno and compared gear to gear when we shift how far the RPMs drop. And always the drop from first to second is always the farthest. So if we shift the GSX8 from first to second gear right at red line, we drop to about 6,400 RPMs, 6,500 RPMs. All of the rest of the shifts are 7,000 RPMs or above. So if I was at the racetrack and I'm coming out of a corner, if these velocity stacks can raise the power from 7 grand up without destroying the bottom end power, for me at the racetrack, that's probably worth it. Coming out at above 7 grand on just about any corner is going to be easy. Almost no corners are first gear corners, and it's going to rev through it so quick that a little bit of less power from 6,300 to 7 grand, not going to really affect it. And if I have more power from 7 grand to redline, then that's a pretty large usable swath that on the racetrack, or if I'm drag racing, any speed contest, that would be worth it to me. So once we get these in there and we can look at the different power curves, we'll be able to assess it better. But that's what I'm going to look at. Usable power under the curve in the area that I'm going to use the bike most. So let's get them installed. Let's do some dyno tests, and we'll get back to you. One quick thing. I am a little concerned about the sealing on the throttle body. So traditionally, velocity stacks are rubber on the ends. And why is that? Is because this slips over the throttle bodies, and we can clamp it, and it will seal. On these, this is the part that slips over it, and it's hard. We're going to put a clamp here and clamp it down, but it's still trying to get hard against hard, metal against this nylon material, and we're going to see if it seals. So I'm happy to report absolutely no leaks. So good job, TST. I checked it several times with the starter fluid like I talked about. It never had any problems. When I compare these, I'm going to compare from the Stage 2 airbox, so that the only thing that's changing is the velocity stacks. When you buy the kit from TST, it comes with the Stage 2 airbox lid. So a lot of their testing just shows, or all of their testing just shows from the stock airbox to this whole setup, which I don't think is completely fair, because as we know, the Stage 2 airbox makes a really big difference across pretty much the whole rev range. So it kind of exaggerates the gains a little bit for the velocity stack. So this is just the only thing being changed is the velocity stacks when we look at all these dyno runs. So the first setup I did was both short stacks. It did require not major fueling changes, but obviously since I did the work to put these on by themselves, I made the necessary fuel changes to get these set just perfect. And as you can see with both short stacks, the area where the RPMs, or the RPM where we crossed over, was right at 7,000 RPMs. So from 7,000 RPMs up, we have nice little gains, and we can see we have, I just missed 90 horsepower, about a 2.5 peak gain at peak. And you can see really all the way out at peak, I'd say it's probably closer to 3 or 4. But we did lose quite a bit from 7 grand to 4,500. So, for a street bike, not thinking this is great, but race bike, drag bike, definitely would be a hot setup. And then I tried the DB Killer out on the same setup with both short stacks, hoping that we would see improvement in the top end with it being able to really flow. And didn't work out that way. It did pop a bigger number, but the only place that the curve is really ahead of it is right at that peak at 9 grand. And we got almost 90.5 horsepower. Notice again that the DB Killer out, oddly enough, again, does make more power from around 3 to 5,000 or 3 to 4,300. Same thing I showed with the stock velocity stack, so not an anomaly. That is true. But again, still, the best setup is DB Killer in. So then I put the DB Killer back in, put both longer velocity stacks in it, adjusted the fueling to get that perfect for that. And what we can see is you lose, about a horsepower on the top, a little horsepower and a half at the peak number. And you do gain from about 4,500 on to almost 6. So this is with both long stacks versus both short stacks. So when we compare the TST stacks with the way they sell them and the way they want you to install them. So these are the staggered. We get the longer one on cylinder 1, the shorter one on cylinder 2 versus the stock stacks. And you can see the crossover point is at 6,700 RPMs. Everywhere above that, we have 1.5 to 2 horsepower more with the TST stacks. Below 4,800, they're about the same. And between 4,800 and that 6,700, the stock stacks work better. You can decide where you ride your bike the most and what's the most important to you. So, for me, at the racetrack or if I was drag racing, I definitely would have the TST stacks. If it was just a street bike, I'd probably stay with the stock stacks. And just for shits and giggles, I pulled out the air filter completely like I've done before on previous tests, and I get this really unnatural looking, cool looking curve where from about 7,300 RPMs all the way up the red line, the curve is basically flat with a little bit of a sag in it. There's something still, obviously there's still gains to be had in the airbox, and something still choking it off. You would expect you wouldn't expect that curve to be that flat. I'm sure when people at Moto America get their hands on one of these things, they will figure out what is still causing that to keep it from climbing all the way up. I would think there's a potential for another 3 or 4 horsepower in that 80, where I'm getting peak power up around 9 grand if this would continue to climb like that. So not really crazy useful, except for that there's some potential still in there. And if we compare the stock bike to the M4 exhaust DB killer in stage 2 airbox sprint filter with TST V-stacks, this is what we got. And it'd be pretty easy to forget about that little bit of loss that we had between 5 to 7 grand when we look at this curve, because it's just killing it. Pretty nice. Thanks, guys, for watching. Remember, hit that subscribe and like button for more motorcycle related content. Do appreciate it. Take care.